Hello everyone, welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfic. Today will be the continuation of Burn Your Wings. This will be part 12, chapter 12, entitled The Calm Before the Storm. They're grounded. It's a novel experience for Izuku, who's never been grounded in his life. Beaten by his father until he thought he might die then and there, check. Locked in the broom cupboard for his own good by his mother, check. Kept at home by a controlling father/upcoming villain, check. But never grounded. And while a part of him is ashamed, the other, larger, if he's being honest, part of him is also fascinated by the concept and being at the receiving end of something that's such a normal teenager thing to do. So they're grounded, or at least as grounded as they can be when they're already confined to their hospital room, but their supervisors had been very clear and adamant this time, no more ice cream escapades. On one hand, Izuku understands their concern. The public is in disarray with the news, and the fan-made videos about Stain going viral, despite the police's best efforts to contain it. Since the three of them are trying to hide the extent of their involvement with the villain, it only makes sense to keep their heads down. And considering Izuku, Todoroki, and Ida are all decked in hospital gowns and in various stages of mummification, not to mention all three of them had significant screen time on national television thanks to the sports festival, they're not exactly inconspicuous wandering around ice cream stalls. But on the other hand, although Izuku had been the one to propose the breakout in the first place, even if Todoroki and Ida, the stiffest of them all when it comes to rules, went through with it without a single complaint, Izuku would say it was totally justified, and totally worth it. Nevertheless, the three of them are piled together and kept in the same hospital room, which actually isn't that bad. After having been terrified that he was going to see both Todoroki and Ida die in front of him, it's soothing and reassuring to be able to keep them constantly in sight. And besides, Izuku had been texting and calling their other classmates to let them know that they're fine and to thank them for responding so quickly to his distress signal. So it's not like they're completely cut off from everyone. Really, being grounded feels more like a glorified sleepover at this point. Not that he has any experience in that either, but he's imagined what it might feel like. So far, these past few days have been living up to and surpassing his fantasies. Izuku hobbles back on his crutches into their hospital room after ending his call with Uraraka. Todoroki, as perceptive and effortlessly attuned to Izuku as ever, raises his eyebrows when he sees Izuku's expression. "What's wrong? Weren't you talking with Uraraka?" Izuku groans. "I was. Turns out she saw the news clip of our ice cream breakout, and her teasing was merciless. I think she used the phrase, 'I won't let you down,' as a joke at least 5 times in the last 10 sentences. Ida snorts and Todoroki grins slightly, his expression a small tugging on the corners of his lips that lights up his mismatched eyes. "It's not funny. You try being paraded around like a trophy on live television," Izuku grumbles, only for his friends' smiles to grow even wider. Soon he too gives in and smiles back at them. "Yeah, fine, all right. So, anything come up while I was gone?" At that, Todoroki and Ida share a look. Ida's diagnosis came out. Todoroki begins cautiously. Izuku's heart misses a beat. No, I'm fine," Ida reassures quickly at the look on Izuku's face, gesturing frantically as if to prove his well-being. "And I have you to thank for that. The doctor said I probably wouldn't have made it alive without you. You immediately put pressure on the wound so I didn't bleed out and didn't even lose that much blood in the first place. And apparently, cauterizing with naked fire has a much smaller chance of infection than sealing a wound with a heated blade or something, although only people with fire quirks can do it, so thank you again." Ida's eyes soften. "I told you would be saving me. Saving all of us." And while there's no blame in Ida's eyes, Izuku feels faintly sick because, despite Ida's kind words, all he can think is, "None of us would have had to go through that if only I hadn't been too late to save you in the first place." Because, despite Ida's reassurances, Izuku knows exactly how dangerous and painful cauterizing a wound is. But they promised each other not to apologize anymore, so Izuku swallows hard and bites back his words. "And how are your arms?" he asks instead, gesturing at both of Ida's bandaged arms hanging in slings. "Both of them were severely injured, but it looks like my left hand could have some permanent damage," Ida admits. Izuku's breath catches. He recalls how Stain had pinned Ida to the ground by driving a katana through his left arm, like a pinning of a butterfly. He recalls how Ida had shielded Todoroki from Stain's knives by catching them in his own arm instead. Something called the brachial plexus nerve was severed, and while they say I might regain most of the feeling and use of my fingers if I get a nerve transplant, I don't think I will. Not yet, at least. Ida looks down at his hand. When I found the hero killer, my mind went blank. But I should have never acted as I did, especially when I just promised not to let you down, Midoriya. And I may hate what he did, but the things he said weren't wrong. So until I become a true hero, my left hand will serve as a reminder. Izuku leans heavily on his crutch at Ida's statement. As much as he's horrified that his friend had not escaped unscathed, there's a calm acceptance in Ida's words. He can't disrespect that by apologizing or thinking what-ifs. So instead he stretches out his own scarred and disfigured right hand, curling it into a fist. I understand, Ida. So let's do better, together. Ida smiles at him, bumping Izuku's right fist with his own bandaged left hand. We'll be better, together, he promises back. Their shared moment is broken by a strangled cough. Izuku and Ida turn their heads to find Todoroki staring down at his own unmarred hand in cold sweat. I'm sorry. Izuku blinks. For what? I thought we agreed that we weren't allowed to apologize and blame ourselves anymore. No, it's just that every time I get involved, it feels like someone's hand gets messed up. Todoroki looks at them with a lost expression. Is this a curse? Izuku chokes. Ida stares, and then they both burst out laughing. Oh my God, Izuku gasps, clutching the crutch clatter to the ground and falling onto Todoroki's bed. It seems you even know how to make a joke, Todoroki. Ida guffaws, and his glasses are knocked askew with how hard that he's laughing. Todoroki looks between them, nonplussed. No, I'm not joking. I feel like I should be named the Hand Crusher or something. Hand Crusher? Oh my God, stop. You're making my stitches burst. Ida doubles over while Izuku is practically rolling around in Todoroki's bed, both clutching their sides from laughing so hard. The funniest part is that Izuku knows that Todoroki is 100% serious. Their laughter has faded away somewhat, Ida and Todoroki sitting in their respective beds while Midoriya is flopped on Todoroki's, not even having been able to make it to his own bed, when Midoriya opens his mouth again. Ida, what about the scars on your throat? He asks in a small voice. Ida straightens up to find that Midoriya is lying with part of his body on Todoroki's bed, half dangling there with his eyes on the ceiling, refusing to meet Ida's eyes. He touches the thick swathe of goth and the bandages on his throat. It doesn't affect my breathing or anything, and they say we can get the hospital soon enough that they can lessen the scarring if I want to. Although Ida plans to leave it as is, just like his hand. He's not the kind of person who revels in battle scars and thinks that they make him more manly or whatever, but he's not ashamed of the proof that his friend saved his life. He's about to say as much when he catches Todoroki looking at him with meaningful eyes. The other boy subtly shakes his head. Midoriya is still carefully keeping his gaze fixed on the ceiling, so he can't see the way that Todoroki is silently signaling to Ida. Do it, the other boy mouths out slowly and clearly. For him. Ida hesitates, wavers, then decides to trust Todoroki on this because while Ida is still slightly a bit jealous of how quickly and easily Todoroki just clicked with Midoriya, Ida was Midoriya's first friend, and Midoriya had been Ida's first real friend as well, but he also feels ashamed of those thoughts. Later he will realize that Midoriya may be Todoroki's first friend too, and after facing Stain together, Ida finds himself losing the slight bitterness that he'd secretly held. Besides, he can't deny that there's something more between Midoriya and Todoroki, an understanding that transcends the short time that they've been together. So Ida will trust Todoroki on this, like he said, for Midoriya. Well, yes, I will lessen the scarring. It's only at those words that Midoriya finally shifts his gaze from the ceiling to look at Ida. Ida watches as his friend's face blossoms in relief. He catches Todoroki looking at Midoriya with sad, sad eyes. Shoto doesn't know everything about Midoriya's past, but he knows enough to be sure that Midoriya would never want anyone to bear burn scars, especially ones made by himself. Even if Ida won't mind them, Shoto knows that they'll plague Midoriya. If Ida tells him that he wants to keep the burns, Midoriya will probably try to persuade Ida otherwise, regardless of how much it'll hurt to look upon the scars. But that's just what Ida wants. So Shoto will speak up for him, because that's what Midoriya needs. Later that night, Izuku sighs as he gets ready for bed. He reaches up and takes the multiple bobby pins out of his bun, shaking his head to let his curls tumble freely into his face. He turns at the feeling of being watched to find Todoroki staring at him. "What?" he asks. Todoroki blinks slowly. "It's just," he says, not taking his eyes off of Izuku. "I'm not used to seeing you with your hair down." Izuku freezes. Last night they'd turned off all the lights almost immediately after getting ready for bed, too worn out by the thorough chewing out of their various supervisors and hospital staff that they'd delivered for the breakout. But Ida has a book propped open for some light bedtime reading. The lights are still on, and Izuku had felt so comfortable with the two of them that he hadn't thought of it when he pulled his hair down from his bun in plain sight. He recalls the reason that he started putting his hair up in the first place all those years ago. He had mimicked his mother's hairstyle in an effort to look less like his father, but now he has his hair down and, "You look like his father, a bunny with droopy ears." "Wait, what?" "What?" Izuku croaks out loud. Ida jumps up from his bed with his phone in hand. "Oh, I know exactly what you mean," he says excitedly, tapping on the phone and then showing it proudly to Todoroki. Todoroki nods approvingly at whatever Ida is showing him on the screen, then beckons Izuku over. Izuku isn't sure he wants to know, but he warily approaches the two anyways. The image on Ida's screen is that of a fluffy, lop-eared rabbit, its ears characteristically drooping down on either side of its face. It is admittedly adorable, but "I do not look like a bunny," Izuku seethes. Todoroki and Ida both give him a look that's eerily identical. "Yes, you do," they say in synchronization. Ida shakes his head at Izuku's affronted squawk and just gets up and climbs back into his own bed. Todoroki pats Izuku's hand in a placating, there gesture, but tellingly doesn't take back the words at all. Izuku huffs at his friends, though admittedly more in a fond amusement than actual annoyance. Suddenly, Todoroki's hand jerks into stillness. Izuku raises his head to find the other boy staring down at Izuku's right hand, the one that's been scarred and deformed from their fight during the sports festival. "It was still bandaged until we left for our internships," Todoroki says quietly, never taking his eyes off of Izuku's hand. "I never got to see it up close after the surgery." He swallows, then bites out the words haltingly, his fingers hovering over Izuku's right hand as if he desperately wants to touch but is also afraid to do so. Can I... would it... And somehow Izuku understands. Without a word, he sits down next to Todoroki on the bed and places his scarred hand in Todoroki's waiting palm. Todoroki clasps onto Izuku's hand in both of his with a sort of desperation. He traces the furrowed scars with an aching gentleness, like he's afraid that he might be hurting Izuku. He skims the deformed bones of Izuku's fingers with almost painstaking care, his own fingertips feather light and trembling just the tiniest bit. There's a certain weight in his movements, a tightness in his face. "It's not your fault." Izuku breaks the silence, guessing too easily where Todoroki's thoughts might be. After all, he's had the exact same thoughts when looking at Ida's scars. And besides, I don't care about getting more scars. "I do," Todoroki almost whispers, so quiet that Izuku is the only one who can hear. "I never wanted you to get more scars, especially because of me." Ah, of course, Todoroki is the only one who's ever seen the extent of Izuku's scars. It makes sense that he'd be more sensitive about it than someone who doesn't know. "Hey," Izuku jostles him purposefully, light and playful. "We've already talked about this. If I don't get to blame myself for Ida's burns, then you don't get to blame yourself for my hand either." "Even if the hand crusher would be a delightful moniker," Ida adds from his bed. "All right," Todoroki finally concedes, although he doesn't let go of Izuku's hand. If anything, he seems to have lost some of the hesitation and starts exploring Izuku's hand in earnest now. Todoroki plays with Izuku's hand, tracing the furrowed scars, aligning his fingers with Izuku's, pressing lightly between his knuckles, and gently rubbing the deformed bones. It almost feels like a cat kneading. Izuku almost snorts at the mental image of a large, affectionate white and red cat kneading his hand. Are you going to keep playing with my hand?" Todoroki blinks at Izuku owlishly. "Should I stop? Does it hurt?" "No, it's just that..." "Isn't this weird?" Izuku bites his tongue. Todoroki honestly doesn't seem to find it strange at all, but then again, this is the person who threw down the metaphorical gauntlet to Izuku out of the blue, not even caring that their entire class was watching. He probably doesn't have the best idea of social norms. But Ida seems to be fine as well, not even batting an eye at the fact that Todoroki is going full cat mode on Izuku and hogging his hand. Izuku isn't sure if he's surrounded himself with socially inept friends or if he's actually the socially inept one. Well, he was telling Todoroki the truth when he said it doesn't hurt. It actually feels kind of nice now that he's a little more used to it and has gotten over the initial weirdness. And if Todoroki wants to do it to soothe his own mind, then who is Izuku to deny him that? Never mind, he says, giving up his right to his own hand. Carry on. Aizawa sits down heavily on the couch of the teacher's break room. He rubs the corner of his forehead with one newly bandaged hand while he holds his phone up to his ear with the other. So that's pretty much what happened in Hosu, finishes the voice on the other end of the line. You'll get a full report later on, but we're letting you know the basics right now since you're in charge of all 3 of the kids. Damn right he is. And he still hadn't been able to do anything when 3 of his students had been facing the hero killer. He had thought that things would be different since the USJ, but he's failed them once again. But Aizawa reins in his frustration and politely greets the police officer on the line. Thanks for letting me know. I'll keep quiet about their involvement. The officer hums, but instead of hanging up, he muses almost to himself. You've got a good batch of hero aspirants this year. It's a pity that we can't announce what they did for society. And especially the first responder. Midoriya, was it? The one who won the sports festival. Kid's got his head screwed on right. Looks like he purposely tried to get Stain talking, to fish for information while simultaneously stalling for time. Aizawa bites back a groan. Of course it was Midoriya. Of course it was his problem child. Not that he did the wrong thing. On the contrary, any morsel of information he managed to pry out probably helped the follow-up investigation immensely. But Aizawa remembers how flippant and lacking of self-preservation Midoriya had been at the USJ. He can only imagine what he could have said to Stain. He even got the hero killer to talk a little about the League of Villains. Oh, and apparently... Aizawa's brain short-circuits when he hears what the officer says. What? Aizawa finally manages flatly. The police officer repeats himself. Aizawa can't bring himself to believe what he's just heard, at the same time instinctively knows that it's true because it's just so Midoriya. His problem child is going to give him premature gray hairs. He's staring blankly at his phone 5 minutes later when All Might enters the room. Probably hoping to find a private place to make his own call, the man stops when he sees Aizawa's face. What happened? He asks worriedly. Aizawa has no idea where to start. But what finally makes out of his mouth is a flat, apparently Shigaraki has a photo of Midoriya and is showing it off to serial killers like he has a schoolgirl crush. All Might chokes. What? Aizawa scrubs his hands over his face. Yeah, my sentiments exactly. When Izuku steps into the classroom after internships is over, he is met with a whoop. He lives! Ashido's cheers, while Sero and Sato were jumping up to pat Izuku down comically as if to check that he's actually here. Izuku laughs, reminded of the morning after the USJ incident. Kirishima grins toothily and shows Izuku the screen on his phone. You're trending. That video on Stain went viral, which means that you went viral. He waves his phone in front of Izuku's eyes as if to emphasize, and Izuku catches a glimpse of the threads titled, Return of the Fiery Angel, Stain's Seal of Approval, All Might and Midoriya. So how about that Stain vid, huh? Featuring Midoriya. Izuku groans, covering his face with his hands. Don't remind me. People are staring even more now, he almost whimpers, because while having the public's eye on you is expected and even necessary to be a hero in this age, Izuku tended to think more about the actual saving people part and not the publicity part. He's totally fine being a fanboy of heroes, but he's not so ready for there to be fans of him. While he's grateful for all the support and being well known will probably help his future goal to become the #1 hero, Izuku still isn't used to being showered with this much positive attention, and the Stain video only upped the number of eyes turned towards him. Thanks, Stain. But come on, it's kind of cool. Kaminari gushes from his seat. I mean, sure, Stain is scary, but that video you're in was legit. I mean, you can really see the tenacity and the one-track mind, but you can't help but admire that kind of conviction, you know? Kaminari. Izuku cuts in sharply before glancing towards the back of the class. Ida is standing by Todoroki's seat, probably drawn together by the familiarity that had grown between the 3 of them over the last few days. Izuku joins them, standing by Ida's side in silent support. Kaminari's eyes follow Izuku, confused, before widening when they land on Ida. "Oh shit, I'm so sorry, Ida," he says anxiously while slapping a hand over his mouth. But Ida calmly looks down at his newly scarred left hand. "No, it's fine. He certainly was a man of conviction. I understand if some people admire him, but his convictions were executed in the wrong way. No matter what the motive, it is simply wrong to kill as he did. So I will walk the path of a true hero so that others like myself shall not emerge." Ida's voice rises in fervor and volume as he goes on, eventually concluding exuberantly while gesturing dramatically with his hand. Izuku watches in awe. Todoroki looked past Endeavor's abuse and acknowledged his status as the number 2 hero. Ida looked past Dane's crimes and acknowledged his conviction. They're both so strong. Shut the fuck up, you losers. A voice grouses and breaks the moment. Izuku follows the sound of the voice to find a familiar but also an unfamiliar silhouette. He chokes. "Kachan?" Izuku sputters. Bakugo's shoulders rise up to his ears defensively. Sero and Kirishima are bursting out into peals of laughter, tears in their eyes, effectively breaking the heavy atmosphere. They don't even seem to care that Bakugo is glaring death at them. Bakugo, whose notoriously spiky hair had been smoothed down and parted into a perfect 2:8 ratio. "Oh my god," Izuku says faintly. "Not a word, Deku," Bakugo grits out. "But Kachan, not a word." Izuku stares in awe and obediently closes his mouth. Instead, he lifts up his phone and snaps a photo. Snap. Bakugo stands there in frozen disbelief for a moment while Izuku rapidly taps away on his phone. Then the blonde explodes. "The fuck did you just do? Wait, no, what the fuck are you doing right now?" "I'm sending this photo to Mitsuki-san. I'm sure she'll appreciate it," Izuku replies. Bakugo flips at the mention of his mother, his hair exploding with a boom back to its usual spikes. He lunges for Izuku with a snarl. "Don't you dare, you shitty nerd. Do you know how much effort it took to sneak into the house to make sure the hag wouldn't see me like this?" "Exactly," Izuku gasps in laughter as he dodges Bakugo's hands that are grabbing for his phone. Todoroki helpfully raises one leg and trips Bakugo. "Mitsuki-san will have a field day. She'll already use this as an excuse to go out and celebratory dessert with my mom for weeks. She'll laugh hysterically and print out a photo to frame it and hang it in the living room just to torture me. That's what'll happen. Do you know how to contact Best Jeanist? I need to send him a fruit basket or something." "Fuck you, Deku!" Their classmates laugh and cheer them on as Bakugo chases Izuku around the class, people chipping in to make Bakugo stumble here and there so that Izuku can finish sending the text to his mother. Their chase ends when Aizawa comes in for homeroom and binds them both with his capture weapon. And Izuku totally didn't have a fanboy moment at actually experiencing that again. Nope. His good mood had lasted, though, through the basic hero training class. All Might teaches, and as though he almost flies over the industrial obstacle course of Field Gamma. Izuku's pull has always given him mobility, and the use of his push has given him stability, and now with full cowl, letting him pull off fine-tuned maneuvers, not even Sero has a chance of beating him in this field. Izuku whoops as he takes a running leap off of the crane, with a full cowl powering his jump, pulling himself across a chasm while adjusting the course with a burst of fire so that he lands on a thick pipe, and then he's off again, part running, part jumping, part flying. His exhilaration dims a bit when All Might pulls up to him discreetly, though. "Incredible," All Might whispers, as he's passing, giving Izuku a secret thumbs up. "Meet me at the beach after school. There are some matters we must discuss about with One for All." And although All Might is smiling proudly, Izuku knows the hero well enough to catch the pensive unease underneath. That does not bode well. Toshinori sits on a flight of stairs overlooking the beach that has become their beach. He considered calling Midoriya to one of the private break rooms in the school like they had the conversation before the school festival, but, well, look at how well that ended up, with spit blood and broken bones and fresh scars that Toshinori was responsible for. Thankfully, the beach is open enough that they can spot anyone approaching, so they won't need to worry about eavesdroppers. And Toshinori is going to need every ounce of comfort and courage that he can get if he's going to talk about One for All, so Dagobah Beach it is. He starts a little when young Midoriya seems to suddenly materialize and take a seat beside him. He keeps forgetting how quietly the boy can move, and he brushes it away, and his surprise as he smiles at the boy. "You said you wanted to talk about One for All," Midoriya begins first, voice low enough that it won't carry far over the sound of the crashing waves. I thought about what this might be about, and Stain didn't ingest any of my blood, if that's what you're concerned about. Toshinori blinks, then shakes his head and chuckles. Of course that's what this boy is worried about. Rest assured, my boy, even if someone ingests your DNA, they won't receive One for All unless you want them to. This is a quirk that can be forcefully given, but not forcefully taken. Oh, Midoriya says, looking relieved but also confused. Then, what is it you wanted to talk about? Toshinori feels as if his skeletal form deflates even more at Midoriya's question. He braces his elbows on his knees and clasps his hands together, his limp bangs overshadowing his eyes. He stays in that position for a moment before he steels himself. I have failed you, the hero starts quietly. When I passed on One for All to you, I thought I was passing on my status as the #1 hero and the beacon of hope. And even that made his heart clench and worry. But it seems I've also passed on the ultimate evil. He takes a deep breath. It is time I tell you about the origin of One for All, the story of All for One. Toshinori tells him. He tells Midoriya about the advent of the era of quirks, about the chaos and the man who tried to rule over it with manipulation, fear, and power. He tells him about the brother who tried to stop that man, about his failure, the meddling of quirks that birthed One for All. He tells him about each wielder of One for All, how they stood against All for One, generation after generation, until the 8th holder, Toshinori himself, vanquished him for good, or so he had thought. He tells him about his suspicions of how the Nomu were made. He tells him about how the influence of the Stain and the League of Villains incident has All for One's and fingerprints all over it. He tells him that now, that ultimate evil, that whispered legend, that horrid bedtime scare, is Midoriya's responsibility as the next wielder of One for All. Toshinori hangs his head. It was bad enough realizing that the full weight of passing on his position of the #1 hero, but Toshinori had never planned to pass on the crushing burden of facing All for One as well. Not even before he came to truly love this boy, as something like the son he'll never have, and especially not now that he does. All for One was supposed to be his responsibility. He should have ended the cycle so that the vile man could never set his sight on his boy. But Toshinori is physically unable to keep his boy safe. He still has a bit of One for All left in him, but in truth he's still running on fumes. It should have ended with me, he finds himself saying bitterly. All my predecessors, including my own mentor, were killed by All for One. You should have never had to face that monster. I have failed you. His words are cut short when a gentle hand places itself on Toshinori's own. He realizes with a start that his hands are white-knuckled, fingers digging into his knees. Toshinori forces his hands to relax under Midoriya's, which is dwarfed by even his skeletal form. You could never fail me, Midoriya says quietly, and Toshinori finds himself raising his head to look at his boy. He lifts his gaze to find green eyes that are infinitely warm but iron-hard with conviction and promise. Don't worry, I will break the cycle. All for One will never kill another wielder of One for All again. I will break the cycle, his boy said, but Toshinori knows Midoriya well enough to recognize what he means is, I will protect you. It takes Toshinori's breath away. His heart melts a little because this is the second time Midoriya vowed to protect him. Him, the #1 hero, the symbol of peace, and no one has ever done that since Nana. My mentor would have loved you, he finally says with a genuine smile. Midoriya blinks. Gran Torino mentioned that he trained you in her stead. He begins cautiously, probably gauging Toshinori's reaction and not wanting to overstep. Toshinori smiles to show him that it's all right, seemingly encouraged. Midoriya swallows before forging on. Can I ask about her? Toshinori hums, turning his head to watch the rays of the setting sun dying on the ocean in tendrils of rose and gold. Her name was Shimura Nana. Regrettably, I did not get much time with her, but I still learned so much from her. She was the one who gave me, a quirkless child, a way to become a hero. She was the one who taught me to always smile. She was my hero. A respectful silence follows his words. Toshinori had noticed that Midoriya was starting in surprise when he mentioned he was quirkless, so when the boy opens his mouth, Toshinori thinks he might comment and ask about it, but instead what comes out is, I'm sorry we didn't get to meet. She sounds like a wonderful person. And that right there, those words that are infinitely considerate and sincere while not prying or being overbearing, is part of why Toshinori loves this child so much. She was, Toshinori agrees, smiling at his boy. You actually remind me of her quite a bit. Midoriya's eyes widen. Me? He almost squeaks. Toshinori nods solemnly. Like your hairstyle, for example. A long silence follows his grave statement. My hairstyle? Midoriya repeats, giving Toshinori a look. And he can't hold it in anymore. Toshinori bursts out laughing, dropping his solemn expression. Granted, even with the familiar half-bun, Nana's hair had been more sleek where Midoriya's hair is a mess of fluffy curls, but that look was so worth it. For the longest time, even thinking of his mentor's memory had elicited only guilt and sadness, but it feels so good and so right to be able to make jokes and laugh in her memory with his own mentee. Nana would have approved. Toshinori grins at the flat look that Midoriya levels at him. And also your courage, your selflessness, your kindness, your strength, your resolve, your warmth, your brightness, and the way you smile no matter what. He smiles softly at the odd and humble expression that Midoriya is now wearing. I have always tried to be even half the hero that she was, but you are already so much like her. And unknown to Toshinori, Izuku's first instinct is to deny it because he has always tried to not be like his father, but he still knew that he was tethered to Hisashi, like father, like son, and there's no way someone like him can be like someone who's so great. There's no way he can be like the hero of his hero. But he also knows what it feels like to constantly look up to someone, and he realizes that this honest feelings are not what All Might needs to hear right now, so he swallows down his self-doubt, and instead he says, Everything good about me came from trying to be like you. Toshinori blinks at the sudden declaration. Midoriya swallows thickly, but he meets Toshinori's eyes squarely. All my life I've tried to be like you, so if I'm like your mentor, then that means you are too. Those words wash over Toshinori like a warm wave. He looks into Midoriya's eyes, earnest, green in surprise, and then he smiles. Toshinori flips the hand that's under Midoriya's so that they're palm to palm and squeezes the boy's smaller hand. Thank you, my boy. They continue talking about small things after that. Both of them exchange tales about their respective times training under Gran Torino, sharing laughs and shudders in turn. When the sun finally sets upon the horizon and the air chills, Toshinori pulls out a blanket to wrap around Midoriya's shoulders. Midoriya blinks down at the green blanket with white hearts printed on it. You sure have a lot of green stuff, he comments, almost absently, fingering the soft blanket. Those plushies you gave me were green, and that bento box and the cloth were green too. Is green your favorite color? Toshinori pauses to think about it, and finds to his surprise that yes, he somehow did accumulate a large number of green things, and at some point green has become his favorite color. Yes, he affirms, both to himself and Midoriya. Oh, it was never in any of your interviews. I guess I kind of thought it might be blue or yellow, Midoriya says, clearly looking at Toshinori's hair and eyes, probably thinking about his hero costume too, and that may have been true once, but Toshinori had adored those bright and bold colors. But now... Toshinori smiles as he looks into the green eyes of his boy. Well, if you add blue to yellow, you get green. Ever since Hosu, Shoto has been sitting with Midoriya and his group of friends at lunch. He had wanted to since the sports festival, but he hadn't known how to approach them or if he was even all right to approach them at all. So he kept his distance, watching Midoriya smile and laugh among his friends with a certain longing. But following the Hosu incident, Shoto finds that he too had become part of that group almost without him even noticing it. Shoto had a connection with Midoriya, yes, but he also had been hesitant to impose on his other friends. But after coming back from the internships, it only felt natural for Shoto, Midoriya, and Ida to stick together. Practically living together in the same hospital room for a few days does that to you, he supposes. Not that he's complaining. The others, like Uraraka, had seemed a bit surprised at first, but had soon beamed at him and were readily accepting of his presence, and Shoto has been sitting with them, a part of their group, ever since. It's one of those days when they're sitting together for lunch when it happens. Today, the predominant topic of conversation is the final exams that are only a week away. Uraraka worries about the written exam, while Ida and Midoriya talk about the practical, with Shoto mostly just keeping quiet and listening. It's probably just a comprehensive test of everything that we did in first semester, Hagakure surprise, and Asui nods in agreement. Then we'll need to keep up our training on top of studying. Oof. Shoto's eyes snap up when he hears Midoriya's yelp. Some student had knocked their elbow into the back of Midoriya's head, and if the smirk on their face is anything to go by, it was undoubtedly deliberate. "Oh, I'm sorry," the boy drawls without a hint of sincerity, looking down on Midoriya. "Your head was just so big that I couldn't help myself." Midoriya just kind of stares at him while the rest of the table bristles on his behalf. Not only would this be beyond rude to anyone, but can't this person see the bandages that are peeking out of Midoriya's sleeves, clearly showing that he's still a patient? Midoriya may be the only one who's still wearing long sleeves instead of the short sleeves of the summer uniform everyone else has changed into, and Shoto is probably the only student who knows why Midoriya refuses to wear the short sleeves, but the bandages are still clearly noticeable. "You're Monoma from Class B, aren't you?" Asui says, not a trace of her usual friendliness in her voice as she stares at him with her big eyes. "How dare you?" Hagakure huffs, but Monoma ignores both of them, using the fact that he's standing next to where Midoriya is sitting to clearly look down on Midoriya. "I heard you guys ran into the hero killer," he brings up abruptly with an infuriatingly nasty smile. "Following the sports festival, it looks like Class A keeps getting more stunts that get you attention." And that's why he's doing this? Because of jealousy of what? Their fame? Monoma continues rambling on about how the attention they've gained is going to end up badly for them and whatnot. It's mostly pathetic, but Ida flinches a bit when Monoma exaggeratedly draws on how they're going to put others in danger. Ida is likely thinking about staying and feeling guilty since he thinks that he's to blame for that. While Shoto usually doesn't give people like this the time of day, and believe him, there have been a lot, what with his connection to Endeavor, his friends don't deserve this. Ida doesn't deserve to be hit in a sore spot that Monoma probably doesn't even know about. Midoriya doesn't deserve the utter bullshit that Monoma is spouting. Shoto's frown has been steadily growing glimmer the further that Monoma goes, and he's just about to tell him where to shove it when Midoriya calmly puts down his chopsticks. The clatter of it against his bowl rings eerily loud. In the split second of silence where Monoma is distracted, Midoriya lifts his head. He looks Monoma in the eye, and his lips peel back to bare his teeth. He gives Monoma a sharp, sharp grin that looks almost serene, despite being more or less a snarl. "I don't care what you say to me, but next time, please think twice before you disrespect what can be a sensitive topic to others," Midoriya says, his voice calm and polite despite the underlying threat and the vicious protectiveness. "And as for attention, if you'd like the leader of villains to carry around your photo and show it to serial murderers instead, then please, by all means, be my guest." Silence follows. Midoriya is still smiling, and his tone is level, but there's something in his voice and his eyes that makes Monoma falter and swallow thickly. He suddenly seems to realize that the three tables closest to them have all fallen silent and are glaring daggers at him. The awkward moment lasts until Kendo, another student from Class B, delivers a chop to Monoma's neck and drags him away. She offers up information that she had gained on the other older students as an apology, telling them that the practical exam consists of fighting against robots like the entrance exam. The air eases up after that, most of the Class A talking about the tidbit that Kendo had relieved, but Shoto catches sight of Ida staring at Midoriya for a long moment. "My thanks, Midoriya," the bespectacled boy says, uncharacteristically quiet. But Midoriya just cocks his head. "For what?" Typical Midoriya. Both Ida and Shoto know Midoriya well enough to realize that he only stepped up against Monoma because he disrespected Ida's situation. Shoto is reminded of when they met Endeavor after their match in the sports festival. Apparently Midoriya hadn't said anything to Endeavor when they had first met, but he had burned the man when he tried to get to Shoto. Shoto doesn't know if he's more fond and grateful or exasperated and worried about Midoriya's selflessness and protective tendencies. "By the way, Deku," Uraraka breaks in. She gives Midoriya a look. "You didn't tell us that creepy hand guy has a fanboy crush on you." Midoriya sputters. That sounds so wrong on so many levels." Hagakure breaks out into peals of laughter, and Uraraka is wearing a triumphant grin. Unlike Monoma's inferiority and jealousy, everyone here knows that this is Class A's way of showing they care, and to have a good laugh as well. Ever since finding out that focusing positive attention on Midoriya works best to put him off balance, it looks like Class A has made it their mission to do it as much as possible in the name of good-natured teasing. Shoto is sure that he isn't the only one who realizes what that implies, that Midoriya isn't used to having others compliment or appreciate him. It's probably one of the reasons some of their classmates seem to have made it their personal mission to do it as much as possible. The "I won't let you down" joke and Midoriya's increasing popularity have both been used literally. Midoriya himself seems to be flustered, but never seems to truly dislike it, usually blushing in embarrassment but also looking a bit flattered. Personally, Shoto approves. That blush suits him well. First Stain and now Shigaraki. Midoriya must be a villain catnip ribbit. Asui hums, and though her expression is impassive as always, there's a mischievous glint in her eyes. Midoriya groans good-naturedly, their friends all laugh, and Shoto feels a smile tugging at his own lips. Not everyone may be favorable to them, but as long as they have each other, they'll be fine. The days pass by, and soon enough the written exams are over and it's time for the practical exam. Aizawa lines up with the other teachers in front of the students of Class A, who are suited up and waiting. "All right," he begins. "Let's start your practical exam." He goes on explaining that it's possible to fail and not be taken on the summer training camp. Ashido and Kaminari, who have quirks that are ill-suited to be used on people, practically vibrate with confidence since they've heard word that there's going to be robots. Well, they're wrong. Nezu pops out of the folds of Aizawa's capture weapon. The principal always did have a fondness for dramatics, and explains that considering current circumstances, they're going to have the students pair off against a teacher instead. He emphasizes the need to be realistic as possible, announcing the news almost gleefully as Ashido and Kaminari are frozen in disbelief. Like he said, dramatics. Aizawa sighs and takes over. "Your partner and teacher have already been assigned. Your tendencies, your grades, your relationships are all factors that have been considered. So without further ado, first, Todoroki and Bakugo. You two are up against All Might." A collective gasp goes around the room. Todoroki and Bakugo kind of gape, both look at each other and at All Might, and the other students aren't that better off. Aizawa hides a smirk in the folds of his capture weapon and starts listing off the other teams. Ashido and Kaminari against the principal, Uraraka and Aoyama against 13, Ida and Ojiro against Power Loader. Once he's done, Ida's hand shoots into the air, straight as a flagpole. "But sir, we have an uneven number of students. Will there be a group of 3 students, like we usually have in other exercises?" At those words, everyone turns to look at Midoriya as if on cue, seeing as he's the only one who hasn't been assigned a partner or a teacher yet. "Ah, as for Midoriya, you're getting special treatment," Aizawa drawls. His attention shoots back to all of his students, and all of them seem to look at him, mildly terrified. Aizawa feels his face split into a grin that Yamada had once called his shit-eating villain face. "You will be up against me, 1-on-1. At this announcement, Kirishima promptly puts one hand on Midoriya's shoulder and pats it sympathetically. "I thought Todoroki and Bakugo against All Might was rough, but man, rest in peace, dude." Sero puts a hand on his other shoulder. "It was nice knowing you." And Midoriya seems too shell-shocked to reply. Brats. Izuku is still shell-shocked after he's been dropped off at the middle of the arena for his practical. Fighting against a teacher is already hard enough. Fighting 1-on-1 against a teacher is ridiculous. Fighting 1-on-1 against Aizawa is unimaginable. It's worse for Izuku than for any of his other classmates because while all of Class 1A has a healthy dose of respect for the underground hero, Eraserhead holds a special place in Izuku's heart. This is the hero that he'd looked up to for a decade. For Izuku, Eraserhead's pedestal is way up there with All Might's. The very thought of going up against him, even in a mock battle, is just mind-blowing. In that sense, he feels sympathy and empathy for Todoroki and Bakugo for having to go up against All Might, but at least they get partners, even if they don't exactly like to do anything approaching team play with one another. Izuku has no idea how he's going to pass this exam on his own. The rules are to either cuff the teacher or have at least one person escape within 30-minute time limit, and that puts Izuku at a serious disadvantage. Things would be much easier if one person distracts the teacher while the other makes a run, but, as already mentioned, no partner in the first place, so he's screwed. Izuku sighs mournfully as he tries to think of a plan. His mind is in overdrive, scrambling and racing as the countdown begins. Everyone in position, the speakers ring, and Izuku readies himself by charging up full cowl. Green sparks flit across his body, and he almost vibrates from the compressed energy. Ready. Go! As soon as the signal is given, Izuku flies like an arrow. Commence Plan A1. Run for it. Ever since Izuku started using his quirk, if there was one thing he had, it's mobility. While it's mostly effective, when Uraraka makes him weightless with her zero gravity. Even without that, Izuku is light enough that he can pull himself across distances with impressive speed. After taking tips from Bakugo's moves at the sports festival, thanks Kachan, sorry not sorry Kachan, he can use the push of his fire to adjust his trajectory, where before he could only move in one direction and had no brakes. And Gran Torino had beaten full cowl into him, letting Izuku further negate the jarring momentum of his pull and giving him much-needed finesse. The combination gives him a huge advantage. In Class A, the only one who can beat Izuku in terms of speed is probably Ida, and even then it's only if they're on a straight line, with no obstacles. Speed is Izuku's strength, and he's going to play it for as long as he can. Aizawa will erase his quirk and thus his speed if he finds him, so basically Izuku is playing a game of hide-and-seek and keep away. The area is a mock town, so even if he's found, he can duck behind buildings and get out of Aizawa's line of sight if he's lucky. Thankfully, Aizawa's abilities are not as destructive as heroes like Power Loader or, God forbid, All Might. That means that he doesn't have to worry about property damage as he can focus on his task. Izuku speeds through the streets, veering to the west side of the arena and going around instead of making a straight line to the exit in hopes of not running into Aizawa. UA, as with most things, has gone plus ultra with its construction, and the area is huge. While that means that it'll take longer for Izuku to run through it, hopefully it also means that Aizawa won't be able to find him, at least for a while. He should have known better. Izuku trips and nearly falls into a pond as full cowl suddenly vanishes, leaving him reeling from the momentum. He spares a look over his shoulder, and there, sure enough, Aizawa is pursuing him from a distance, jumping off of telephone poles and running along fences. While Izuku knows how good Eraserhead is, he should be weighed down by those weights the support department had designed. How is he still moving like that with Hatsumi's weights on? He pushes down his incredulity and starts running again, quirk or no quirk. Time for Plan A-2. If Eraserhead finds you, keep as much distance as possible and get out of his line of sight. Izuku has followed Eraserhead's career religiously, and despite him being an underground hero, Izuku still knows his style well enough. To put it simply, Izuku has a snowball's chance in hell against the hero in close combat, regardless of whether he's weighed down or not. Izuku modeled his fighting style on Eraserhead's, after all. Like Stain, he is similar, but better than Izuku in every aspect. So Izuku doesn't even entertain the thoughts of confronting the hero. Instead, he races towards the closest corner and skids around it before the hero can close the distance between them, effectively putting himself out of Eraserhead's line of sight and out of the influence of Eraserhead's quirk. Full cowl will spark back to life, and Izuku shoots off, winding around buildings and taking detours in hopes of shaking Eraserhead from his tail. But his quirk flashes out of existence again, and Izuku yelps as he skids on a patch of sand, sputtering at the grains of sand that fly into his mouth. His situational awareness has him whipping around to find Eraserhead jumping from roof to roof like a ninja. So cool. He can't help but fanboy a little as he spits out the rest of the sand and throws himself under a bench to break Eraserhead's line of sight. As soon as his quirk returns to him, Izuku pulls himself across the park as fast as he can. Eraserhead's quirk is quick to erase his again, but his pull has given Izuku enough momentum to dodge around a corner and take off running. The pattern continues on for a while. Izuku runs using everything he can, though he can't use his pull or his fire as effectively as he'd like to when they're in a mock town and the alleys are short and winding. Eraserhead somehow finds him, like the ninja that he is, and erases Izuku's quirk from a distance. Izuku jumps out of his line of sight before Eraserhead can close their distance and bind him, and repeat. At some point, Izuku gives up on trying to lay false trails and just heads straight to the exit while evading Eraserhead to the best of his abilities, because it's soon clear that no matter what he does, the hero is still going to find him. He just grits his teeth and does his best to adapt accordingly to the circumstances. But the next time Izuku's quirk is erased, Izuku doesn't find Eraserhead behind him. Instead, the hero bursts out from a tree in front of Izuku. He barely has time to yelp before he's strung up like a dangling cocoon. Unbidden, the words Plan A-3, if you're caught, you're screwed, flash across his mind. Eraserhead ties the end of the capture weapon securely, then throws down the calcips on the ground. They're underneath Izuku for good measure, only then does he pull out a watch from his pocket and glance at it. 16 minutes, not bad, he hums. Izuku groans. He half-heartedly tests the bonds. Yup, quirk still erased, before slumping. But not good enough, seeing as I got caught, he points out. Though, to be fair, this is Eraserhead. He probably should be proud that he even lasted this long. After all, not even Hisashi had managed to escape the hero. How did you keep finding me? Izuku asks, in an attempt to distract and direct his thoughts from dwelling on his father. This is the first time he's been able to be alone with his hero in a long while. He is not going to let Hisashi taint this opportunity. Practice and experience. Eraserhead, no, Aizawa now, seeing that the way he's slouching, he's back in his teacher mode. Aizawa answers. Once you chase down enough villains, you get a feel for how people tend to move. Izuku swallows thickly at being compared to villains. Thankfully, at that moment, the speakers ring out and cut Izuku's line of thought. This is an announcement. The first team to pass is Asui and Yaoyorozu. Izuku perks up in happiness for them, then slumps back down in his bindings. If Izuku had a partner, they could be running for the exit gate at this very moment, or distracting Aizawa so Izuku could get free, but instead he has Aizawa's undivided attention, which might not be great in other circumstances, but, well, circumstances. I really think I'm at a serious disadvantage, Sensei, especially without even a partner, he says morosely. True, Aizawa acknowledges, pushing his goggles to look Izuku in the eye, which is why I'm going to give you a hint. What's the purpose of the practical exam, Midoriya? Izuku blinks. It's a comprehensive test on everything that we did in the first semester, is what you told us, he says hesitantly. But you also said that our partners and teachers were assigned considering our tendencies, our grades, and our relationships. He thinks back on the groups. Sato and Kirishima have strong, simple quirks and were matched against Cementos, who can make infinite fodder for them, he thinks out loud. Aizawa doesn't stop him, so he continues. Koda and Jiro have sound-based quirks, and they were pitted against Present Mike, who has superior volume. Todoroki and Kachan are both powerful and competitive, but will be overwhelmed by All Might if they don't get over themselves and work together. He trails off as it slowly dawns on him. Weaknesses, Izuku realizes. The practical exams are tailored to specifically address our weaknesses. Good, Aizawa acknowledges. Now then, the next question is, what's yours? For a moment, Izuku can't respond. The answer doesn't come as readily because he has so many weaknesses. But he tries to think of what Aizawa would say, or specifically what he would be as a weakness alone with Aizawa. I modeled my entire fighting style on yours, so in that sense you're the present Mike to my Jiro or Koda, he begins slowly, but that's not all, is it? Aizawa makes a noise of approval, then he starts ticking off his fingers. The entrance exam, the quirk assessment test, the USJ, the sports festival, Stain. Aizawa looks Izuku in the eye. Name me one major incident where you didn't get seriously injured, or, more specifically, where you didn't injure yourself. Izuku opens his mouth, falters, then closes it because he honestly can't. He'd used his quirk at the entrance exam and the quirk assessment test, fully knowing that he'd be burned. He knew One for All would break his bones with every use and used it anyways, until Gran Torino guided him, and even fighting Stain, when he was using his fire, it didn't burn him, and Full Cal didn't shatter his bones. He still pulled Stain's blades towards himself to shield his friends with his own body. Aizawa gives him a knowing look at Izuku's silence. You fixed the backlash that made you throw up. You even found a way to not get burned and to not break your bones, which is good, but it's not enough. It's not the point. Aizawa gestures towards Izuku's hands that are tied behind his back, reminding him of his newest assortment of scars on his right hand. Your problem is that you don't just accept the possibility of injury. You embrace it. You planned for it. You think nothing of it. And that's not okay, especially if you want to succeed as a hero, Aizawa says vehemently. I thought you had to be willing to sacrifice yourself to be a hero, Izuku replies, taken back by Aizawa's intensity. That's true, too, but everything has a line, and there's a point where even virtue becomes vice. The hero, no, the teacher sighs at Izuku's expression, likely picking up on his confusion, and elaborates. At this point, Izuku feels like he's listening to one of Aizawa's lectures, instead of going through a practical exam, despite the fact that he's still strung up and dangling from a tree. Think of All Might. No one worries for him or thinks twice about relying on him. Why? Because he's the #1 hero. Because people expect him to win in whatever situation. Because everyone sees him as the symbol of peace. Now, think of me. Aizawa grimaces as he says that, as if it physically pains him to put himself in the center of attention, but he plows on regardless. Back in the USJ, when I took on the villains, everyone relaxed because they thought the situation was handled. Everyone except you. Why? This time it's not a rhetorical question. Izuku swallows as Aizawa's red eyes pierce him. Because I knew it wasn't handled, he says truthfully. I was worried for you. Exactly, Aizawa grimaces. You were right. I'm not suited to fight against a group for a long period of time. I put on a front and acted like I had control over the situation so that all of you wouldn't panic and evacuate calmly. It worked on everyone except you. You knew, you worried, and you hesitated. Aizawa lets out a sigh. All Might isn't the only one who is a symbol. People should be comfortable asking for help from any hero. And for that to happen, they can't be worried about the hero. That means projecting an image, and that means you can't afford to get injuries that you can avoid. He gives Izuku a hard look. If you keep injuring yourself, then no one's going to ask for your help. You can't save anyone if you don't save yourself first. Izuku is speechless. He recalls how he had stepped between his parents when Hisashi became violent. He remembers taking the beating in Inko's stead. He remembers how elated he'd been that he'd been able to protect his mother. But Inko had cried. I'm sorry, Izuku, she had sobbed. I'm so sorry, Izuku. And only now, more than a full decade later, does he finally have an inkling of understanding. Oh, he thinks faintly. So that's why she'd apologized. Aizawa waits quietly as Midoriya processes what he's told him. You're getting special treatment, he had said before the exam, and he'd been telling the truth. Though not in the sense that Midoriya is the only one going against a teacher one-on-one. No, Midoriya's special treatment is not in the makeup, but in the context of his exam. One of the things that UA tries to teach its students is the ability to set aside their natural instincts and brave the violence of the world of heroes and villains. It's why they condoned and even encouraged the students to go all out on each other in the sports festival. It's a process of exposing them to rigorous yet contained settings, slowly easing them in so that by the time that they graduate they'll be prepared for the harsh world. But of course his problem child had the exact opposite problem of everyone else. He has too little self-preservation and is too willing to sacrifice himself. Probably has something to do with the myriad of old scars that he keeps covered under his sleeves and hidden by his smile. Aizawa's gone through the files of all of his old cases by now, but he still hasn't been able to find one that looks like it has to do with Midoriya. Perhaps he wasn't directly related and thus not mentioned by name, but that's going to make things harder to find. He's not insensitive to outright ask. So, as of yet, Aizawa doesn't know what happened to make Midoriya so dismissive and even expectant of all of his injuries, but he sure as hell will find out. This is the reason Aizawa was matched with Midoriya. He can erase Midoriya's quirk on the off chance that the kid tries to pull another stunt and injure himself, and his specialty is capture, not destruction. The last thing he wants is for himself to give Midoriya any injuries when he's trying to preach self-preservation and hammer what should be natural instinct into his skull. Heck, he'd even taken care to only erase Midoriya's quirk when he was near bodies of water, sand, or open spaces so that the sudden disappearance of his speed wouldn't make him slam into a wall or something. He presented the idea that Midoriya should take better care of himself as a requirement to become a good hero, and while that's true, and is also the reasoning that will likely get Midoriya to most effectively take care of himself, it isn't the entire reason. If he's being honest, he just really, really, really wants this kid to stop hurting himself, regardless of whatever impact it may have on being a hero. Aizawa sighs a little as he eyes Midoriya. Do you understand the lesson? Multiple emotions flit across his face. Aizawa can almost hear his mind whirling. I think so, he says. His voice is hesitant, and there's a crease between his brows. Good. That means he isn't just brushing this off, but thinking about it seriously. Midoriya perks up from where he's dangling under the tree. Wait, does that mean that I passed the exam? Aizawa snorts. No, he says blithely. Understanding the lesson is just a prerequisite. You still have to follow through like everyone else. At that, Midoriya's eyes take on a glint. Well then, I guess it's a good thing Plan B was already in motion. And before Aizawa can process his words, Midoriya suddenly rips apart the capture weapon that was binding him with his bare hands. Aizawa is taken by surprise. His capture weapon is sturdy enough that Midoriya shouldn't be able to tear through it without using his super strength of his quirk, and Aizawa is erasing his quirk. So how? Midoriya grabs the portion of the capture weapon that is still tied to the tree branch, hanging above the caltrops that is dropping down on them, risking injury himself. God, he's actually taking this lesson to heart. and then he throws the bundle of ripped cloth straight in Aizawa's face. Aizawa can't help it. He blinks, and in that split second Midoriya lights up in green sparks and vanishes into the tree. That leaves him hiding from Aizawa's sight and quirk. There's a rustle as he moves, and Aizawa catches him running towards the exit gate. Aizawa pauses before setting out after him. There's a little less than 10 minutes until time is up, and Aizawa's already had the layout of this fake town memorized. He can afford to delay a few seconds since he'll be able to cut off Midoriya's path. He looks down at the bundle of his ripped-up capture weapon to find out how Midoriya tore out of it while Aizawa was erasing his quirk throughout their conversation. As he runs his fingers over the length, he finds a section that has tiny pinpricks of brown along the tattered edges. Scorches, he realizes. Since Aizawa kept erasing Midoriya's quirk, the only times he could have used his fire would have been the split seconds when Aizawa blinked. The burns are small enough that they would have made barely any smoke, and Aizawa hadn't been able to smell anything at all since he was upwind. But to make enough tiny burns to rip through that sturdy capture tape while still being able to be subtle enough that Aizawa didn't notice, he must have planned this from the beginning. Brat. Aizawa grins. He drops the rags and takes off running to cut off Midoriya's escape. He may approve of the kid's actions, but that doesn't mean he's going to just let him pass. Judging from the direction that Midoriya took off in, and the subconscious pattern that he moved in before, Aizawa makes an educated approximation of Midoriya's position. He runs over fences and roofs to save time, and just as he turns a corner, a ball of fire flies into his face. Aizawa instinctively jumps into a niche spot that he had found between two balls, narrowly avoiding being scorched. His mind is racing. Has Midoriya decided to fight back, or is this just a tactic to delay Aizawa, so that he has more time to run into the exit? When he hears a distinct click-click near his feet, he slowly lowers his gaze. There, cuffed around both of his ankles, are the handcuffs that mark the villain caught. Aizawa cranes his head around to look behind him, and sure enough, Midoriya has crouched right behind him, frozen, looking up at him with wide eyes, almost as if he himself can't believe that just worked. "Midoriya has passed the exam," Recovery Girl announces cheerily over the speakers, breaking their pseudo-staring contest. "What?" Aizawa manages. Midoriya blinks and starts explaining rapidly. "You, said that you predicted where I would go, so I predicted where you would go based on that, and then I found a good spot for an ambush and hid behind this trash can, and blocked all other paths with fire so that you'd come here, close enough for me to cuff you, and when you did, I cuffed you?" He says it like a question, like he's not sure if Aizawa will approve. "Did you hurt yourself at all?" he asks. "No," Midoriya confirms. "Not a single scratch." At those words, Aizawa reaches out a hand and places it on Midoriya's head. And for all that it's become a habit at this point, it's the first time he's doing it with his hand, not a cast. And he pats his curly hair. "You did good," he reassures, feeling a small smile tugging at his lips. And Midoriya looks up at him with wide, starry eyes, and then he beams. Sensei, I can free you if you give me the keys." Aizawa gives him a look. It would defeat the purpose if the villain had the keys. They're back at the bus. The bus that he can't get to because Midoriya had cuffed his feet together and he can't walk. Of course this would happen. At this revelation, Midoriya looks alarmed, but then thoughtful, then earnest as he hesitantly reaches out both his arms towards Aizawa. "I could carry you there." Aizawa stares at his problem child. Midoriya stares back. It's a full 5 minutes later that Aizawa finally caves and is picked up by Midoriya. Again. Bridal style. Again. Yamada is never going to let him live this down. This concludes Chapter 12 of Burn Your Wings. I'll have the next chapter for Chapter 13 up for you guys here soon as well. And I hope you all enjoyed this one. I really like this one so much. So, as always, thank you all so much for listening.